Hello, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Ronnie Pinoy. My pronouns are she, hers, and I'm really thrilled to welcome you all to this conversation. I'm calling from the lands of the Piscataway and Anacostan people on the lands colonially known as Washington, D.C., and I want to begin our conversation tonight by paying respects to the ancestors, past, present, and future of those people. I am a guest on these lands. My background is that I am Laguna Pueblo and Cherokee, and so I'm thrilled to have been on these lands and working with many Piscataway and Acostan people over the course of the last 10 years. So thank you very much for that. And now I'm happy to extend an introduction to, I guess, more myself and the other members of my team. So I am one of the Producer Hub team members, along with my colleagues Sophie Blumberg and Brian Hunt, that are also producing this event tonight. And the topic of tonight's conversation is pitching in the time of the pandemic. And for those of you for whom this might be your first Producer Hub conversation, I just want to give the briefest of introductions to what we're up to tonight. So the Producer Hub is less than a year old. We launched it in this pandemic moment that we're finding ourselves in. And it's really it's a virtual platform and gathering place for independent producers and other makers of live performance to come together and really better our practice to examine the ways that we produce, the ways that we share work, the ways that we are, and ask ourselves the questions of how we can do better together. So while the Producer Hub really focuses on the work of the independent producer, as that's a space that we feel hasn't had a lot of support historically, we really welcome conversation across the live performance field about how we can move forward towards a more just and equitable arts practice. So that's a little bit of the Producer Hub in a short bit. I'll throw out that please, if you haven't been to the Producer Hub website, please do join us at producerhub.org. And I'm now looking at the comments coming in, and I'm seeing some awesome people here. Hey, B. Hey, Angelique. Thanks so much for being here tonight. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and just get us to dive in and start this conversation. So we have three phenomenal humans joining us tonight who I am thrilled are sharing their time and expertise with us. So first up, I'm happy to introduce Madeline Sayette, who is a director, writer, and actress whose work explores decolonization, Shakespeare, and the harm and healing of the stories we tell. And then Tommy Kriegsman is a creative producer and founder of Archetype, where he collaborates with many artists and institutions, creating live performance. And also the lovely Brooke Porsche, who's the executive director of Utah Presents and the assistant dean for art and creative engagement in the College of Fine Arts at the University of Utah. So I'll let them all, say hi a little bit additionally as we get started. But first, thank you all so much for joining us tonight and for talking about pitching and all of the many things that means. So first, this is going to dovetail a little bit from our prep call. But one of the first things we talked about is that pitching can mean many different things to many different people. It can also have a little bit of a bad rap. So how do you each work with others to advance potential projects, whether it be as an artist, producer, or presenter? And how is pitching an active part of your practice or not? And Maddie, I'm going to start by throwing it over to you.
Hey. Chan at Tioisa Chokais. Hey, everybody. I'm Maddie. I'm a citizen of the Mohegan tribe here in Connecticut, where I am zooming in from our traditional lands, which are also the traditional lands of the Mashantucket Pequot and Eastern Pequot. Yeah, this question is so interesting to me because I don't really, pitch in a formal capacity, but I have lots of conversations with lots of different people, and I feel like so often the really good relationships come out of a shared mission or interest in the same things, all of my work does come from relationships, right? Like everyone's work is built out of relationships. But I can't think of any instance in which I've ever had to do like a 30-second pitch, and it's worked as well as sort of like my overall career of like discourse and dialogue and being in constant relation with people. And I think that's because so much of my work is well, to be honest, it's not work where I can just trust someone. And
Mhm.
I have a very due to like a lot of experiences early in my career, I don't trust a lot of producers. And so whenever I'm actually engaging in collaboration, I feel less like I've never felt motivated to try and pitch someone something, but actually it's more of a care situation where because of much of my work having to do with I work as a director reimagining a lot of classics, but then I also, as a playwright, tell stories that are very personal to me as a Native person as well. And because of a lot of the experiences I've had with producers who approach indigeneity in a very tokenized transactional manner, where they have expectations of a kind of, feathers and fringe reality that is never what I'm going to give them, I have to actually genuinely trust that this person is not seeking to do something harmful before I can even engage in any kind of a collaborative process. And
Mhm.
so that's actually affected a lot of my work over the years. And also I also very actively have always been, blogging very specifically my viewpoint. In the COVID era, that's translated to a lot of panels. So I feel like people who are drawn to my work are drawn to like both my work and my ideology as much as anything else. And I feel like for me, that's been really liberating because I'm not the kind of person, I think, who is like very confident to like go in and be like, blah, 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 blah. Here is my, I don't have that like swanky car salesman vibe. I don't think I could pull that off. I'd probably like turn red and puke. I'm very grateful that I have found over the course of my career alternative methods for relationship building that feel very long lasting, as opposed to having to, adhere to any particular existing format.
No, Maddie, I so appreciate that because I think that while like I'll definitely speak for myself, and I'm sure and Tommy and Brooke are going to speak to this in a moment, but pitching is a big part of what I feel like I do in my practice. And what I love is the way that you're framing it. It's that that's not the only way to actually communicate with other people about what you do and advance projects and build work and build a body of work and a practice and a career, so there's many different ways to do it. And I also feel like there are also ways to pitch that don't feel quite so much like Glengarry Glen Ross, and feel a bit more in the kind of relationship base. And I'm curious now, if I throw it over to you, Tommy, next, if you can talk a little bit about how you work with others to advance projects and how pitching is a part of that.
For sure. Tommy Kriegsman, pronouns are he and his, calling from the traditional territory of the Lenape tribes, past, present, and future, in the colonialized land known as Brooklyn in the state of New York. So pitching is a huge part of what I do because as a non-artist, I am taking the seeds of ideas and I'm starting from that, pivot point and trying to navigate the project on behalf of the artist all the way to fruition and all the way through as much of a lifespan as it can possibly have. So in order to do that, I have to pitch. I have to pitch a lot, and I have to talk about the work in as active and energized a way as I possibly can. And I have to figure out how these high risk works, because everything I do is high risk, right? Everything. I would assume that every producer on this call and, mostly in the world, they're choosing to activate a piece of theater because they think it's necessary. And I choose to go after work that I feel is as necessary as I can make work be. And it's usually because it's got a very, very political position, and it's got a voice that I believe to be essential and that may not be heard in as often and as magnified a way as it should be, and celebrated. And so in order to activate that and to build the bridges between the artist and whoever's going to be supporting that artist to make that work happen. I'm the one who is doing that, and I'm the one who has to do that, very, very carefully, and also with a knowledge of not just what the artist is bringing to the table, but what I'm bringing to the table in terms of the servicing of that relationship, and also what the presenter is bringing to that table. And I'm coming in with assumptions. I've done my research on that presenter or that venue or that regional theater or that independent producer. I've done as much as I can do in advance. I want to know if they've ever come in contact with the artist or with anybody associated with the artist. I want to know if they have programmed something in their past that is along these same lines. I want to know if I'm asking them to take what I know to be a gigantic step in a direction that they have never, ever, ever, ever gone to, or if I'm making a very slight step, or if I'm doing something that is really aligned with what I know their values and goals and mission to be. And I do believe in the value of bringing extremely challenging work to those who do not normally support extremely challenging work. And I also trust that in that situation, I can be as in service to the artist and caring of the artist when that situation cannot be, that we can get through that situation, and that I can prepare everybody involved to care for that situation as much as possible. That's not easy to do at all, and that has failed a number of times, but that is the goal. And on the other side of it, the artist and I always come out and we've learned a lot, and we can take those lessons on to another challenge. And that all has to do with the idea that, distribution is really, it's just something that I really believe in. I believe in the way a piece can activate in different circumstances, within different cultures, within different cultural frameworks, within different ideologies, and that actually enhances and enriches the piece. So that's what my pitches essentially contain when I'm talking to somebody about them.
No, and I appreciate that, Tommy, because you really talk about pitching as an ongoing practice that is getting reinformed and is becoming more robust over time. So I appreciate that framing. And Brooke, I'd love to hear you jump in on this as well, to hear from your perspective as a presenter, as a partner, how you advance projects, and how a pitching is and isn't a part of that.
Right. Well, again, I'm Brooke Horsch, and I'm based in Salt Lake City, Utah. We are on the ancestral homelands of the Goshute, the Ute, the Paiute, and the Shoshone peoples, and we are so grateful to them for all of their stewardship, both past and present, of this amazing place that we get to be guests on. It's a beautiful landscape with many, many beautiful resources. So pitching is interesting for me because I need all forms of it, to be honest. You had kind of alluded to sometimes pitching gets a bad rap when you set up the topic, and it's true, it does. I mean, I'm a presenter that mostly is focused on mission-driven work, and all of our artists do some kind of engagement work when they're joining us in this community. But the depth of that, it varies. And I'm also a presenter that is largely self-funded. So I have to present along a spectrum, which means sometimes I need to do things that are really easily recognizable, not necessarily commercial, but recognizable, right? Which means that those kinds of projects generally can be pitched to me in a really sort of familiar format, right? Like, I don't have to get to know the artist or the agent really deeply. We're not going to do, something challenging like Tommy is referencing. And those pitches that are really straightforward in that way are useful because I need those projects. I need those options. But I'm also a presenter that dives deep into lots of interesting topics, challenging work, and contemporary work. And so I also need the pitches that come from relationships. I need the ones where an artist or an agent or a manager, producer is going to really listen to what we're trying to accomplish and who our community is, who's here, or who we're trying to serve. What are the challenges? Where are the opportunities? And then really be able to trust that person to tell me about projects or artists that are a good fit for that. So we do need all versions of pitching, and I think I try to signal if what you're going to pitch me, if I know right from the beginning that it isn't going to be a good fit from that moment. But I also try to sit in a space that's open, because oftentimes it's what you don't know about that ends up being the thing that you need the most, right? So being willing, I mean, this sounds crazy. I get so many emails per day about those, but I really do try to look at every one of them before I delete them. Because there might be something there that's unexpected, right? I'm just one person. So I can only know about so many things, and I have to rely on all different ways of pitching me, whether it's an email or a phone call or a showcase or a word of mouth. Like, I have to rely on all those things to really fill my hopper of potential collaborations full up so that there's lots to choose from.
Absolutely. No, and I think you covered so many valuable things in there, and that one thread that I'll just pull out from a lot of what you're saying is trust, and doing your research and understanding and listening, and really hearing what is happening on the other end of the conversation. Because I think pitching can often, I mean, at least when I was first starting, the kind of idea of pitching I had in my head was very one way. And everything that this group is sharing, it's really so much more dialogue than a one-way dynamic.
Yeah, I mean, I just have to respond to that to say that I have partners, colleagues out there. Ronnie, you're a great example of this, where I've come to trust Octopus Theatrical's own choices around curation, right? Because you're curating a roster of artists. And so I will come to you and say, hey, I'm looking for something like this. I don't know where it is or what it is, but this is kind of what the parameters are. This is the need I'm trying to fill. Do you have anything along those lines? And then so sometimes I'm pitching it, or I'm asking for a pitch, right?
Exactly. No, and I think that's right on. And really gets at like pitching as a wider series of relationships and the ecosystem that we're all a part of. And Tommy, I want to go back to you to expand a little bit more on the way that you were talking about articulating an artist's vision. I'm curious if you can, because I feel like this has been something that a lot of independent producers have been asking for in this moment, is like, what constitutes a good pitch? And being the producer hub, I think understanding what the components of that are, I think would be really valuable for a lot of folks listening.
I think what constitutes a good pitch is that when it's really going well in in a tete-a-tete conversation between yourself and a potential partner, all of what you're describing is aligning, bit by bit. That what they're reading into what you're talking about, because every, of course, piece of art or especially a piece of theater has so many dynamics about it. They can be seen in a million different ways. It can be performed in, so many different contexts. It can be understood in so many different ways. Each work has its own effect on audiences that may be more new to subject matter or way more advanced in subject matter. So when I'm within that, the framework of a conversation with a presenter or a venue or a partner or a regional theater or other, I'm trying to take it from the point of view of what their communities are going to respond to, and what community they may be trying to be more welcoming toward. Perhaps. Yeah. Or be more inventive and responsive to. And that's a huge part of what that pitch is going to do, and where I'm going to be putting certain works on the table, where I'm not going to be putting certain works on the table. And I mean, I should come from a sort of very specific place, which is that when someone is sitting down with me, there are probably 30 pieces that we could be talking about at any given time. So I have to be very careful about how I gauge that, and not waste anybody's time. That's a very big part of why people like Brooke are even willing to sit down with me, is that I'm not going to waste their time. Because there are 3,000 works that they can be choosing from at any given time. So how do you make yours a priority for them? Part of that is my choosing of work and the power inherent to that work, and making sure that that work is of a certain quality and of a certain power and of a certain aptitude and depth that is going to respond to all these mechanisms. And then another part of it is, simply how that work is going to be able to be positioned. So a successful pitch ultimately is going to give a partner immediately an understanding of how that work is from beginning, middle, and end. And that's a very short time frame in order to create that picture, I think. They have to understand what it is from a marketing perspective. They have to understand what it is from an internal perspective of how their staff is going to treat and respond to that work. And they have to understand it from a community perspective, and from the artist perspective about how they're going to care for the artist and how that experience is going to be. So it's one that ultimately equals that there is great mutual reward to enter into this situation.
No, right on. And I also think it's worth sharing for the folks listening that, a lot of this conversation is existing, looking at pitching as coming from a independent producer or artist towards someone who is going to be presenting their work, fully completed. But I just want to shout out that this is, of course, not the only way to be pitching work. This is not the only way to be building relationships. Whether you're a playwright who's in relationship with a literary manager, whether it's a an artist agent, or if you're I often think about the network of ensemble theaters, and a lot of those ensemble theaters who are working with each other and doing exchange and presenting each other's work. Mm-hmm. So I think this ability of understanding first, like doing some thinking about who you're talking to and why, and doing some kind of level of choice making before you get there. I think, Tommy, to your point, is so critical. So just to shout out that there's not a assumption that this way of working is the only way of working. And I think a lot of what we're trying to, the threads we're trying to pull out here can be more broadly applied. So just shout out for that. And I want to actually shift now to thinking specifically about everything we've talked about so far, but with the lens of the pandemic on it. So, and Maddie, I want to throw this question over to you. How has the pandemic changed your approach? And moreover, how has your community changed, or your approach to working with that community changed over time?
Yeah, it's funny because until I started thinking about this a couple of days ago, I don't think I had realized how many people I work with right now that I never met in person. And it's well over 300 when I started counting people that I'm collaborating with right now that I have never met pre-pandemic. And that's like I just started, like, it's probably quite a lot more than that actually, which is really interesting to me right now. So for those of you who don't, so I am an artist in like multiple capacities. I'm both a director, a writer, and a performer. And that sort of happened mostly because I was trying to be useful. I was a performer and I felt like there were plenty of them. And then I, sort of shifted to directing because it was useful, and then writing. And then somehow I ended up in a solo show, and then it shifted all back over again. Right. But it was a lot of that was actually just like, well, I want to be making things with people and I want to be useful. So what can I be doing right now that is useful? And what that's translated to in the pandemic is really actually for the first time, I'm actually able to do all of the things because we're not limited timeline wise to be in one place the way that we were before. And so I'm collaborating on so many things, both as an artist and as a scholar right now. in a way that would have never been possible before. In addition to that, for Native theater, and I am also the executive director of the Yale Indigenous Performing Arts Program, and also co-artistic director of Red Eagle Soaring Native Youth Theater, and for both of those programs, as well as all of my other work, accessibility for Native folks during the pandemic has been immense. Like growing up for me, like I didn't find out that there were Native playwrights until my final year of college, because that's not what's accessible, you know, in a small town. You go to the bookstore, if you have a bookstore nowadays, you might not, right? You go to the bookstore and what's on the shelves is like 80 million versions of Shakespeare plays, and you're not going to find a Native playwright. And you're not going to find that in school, and no one's going to teach you that they exist. But now suddenly what's happening is that you don't have to be in a city, because actually no matter where you are, as long as you have internet service, which is a zoned limitation, right? You can access whatever's happening. So a Zoom reading of a Native play, while it might seem like silly to some people, you do that Zoom reading in New York City, you get 20 people to show up. You do that Zoom reading online and suddenly there's 2,000 people watching. And so the way that has actually shifted the way that within Native theater, we're able to collaborate constantly. And actually a lot of us all be in our homelands and still be collaborating, is really, really transformational. And I'm really excited now by the possibilities that offers. Like, for example, I've been privileged in that I've actually also been able to make a lot of art during the pandemic. I also understand that for a lot of people that hasn't been the case. A lot of this is realistically due to the fact that there was a shift in attention to Native peoples from producers, or like, you know, during the pandemic, in relationship to a lot of the harm that has been done to our communities. And that was not necessarily true also pre-pandemic. You know, what happened with George Floyd, and also what happened with Native people facing the highest rates of death because of COVID. Like there was a lot of movement that drew attention to our stories and our communities in a way that was not true before. Mm-hmm. But what that means is that now we're creating all of these opportunities for access. And even this spring, my solo performance piece, Where We Belong, is at Woolly Mammoth. And, you know, structurally, there's a part of me as a theater maker that's like, it's going to be recorded and on film, and that's not what it's supposed to be. And that's like terrible. And it's going to like make me cringe. But then there's the other part of me that's like, if we did this show in DC, how many Native people would be there? If we release this show online for 2 weeks, like it completely changes who the audience is and who's able to access it. And so I was definitely one of those people who pre-pandemic was like a theater person. And I was like scared of like all other mediums, you know? And now I've been forced to do voice acting, to create audio plays, to create Zoom plays, to do all of these things that like, you know, are messy the first time that you do them, but like open you up to more possibilities. And I actually feel like, you know, even though as a director, I think as a writer and as a performer, I feel much more engaged in this medium. As a director, I feel like I don't know what I'm doing, to be honest, you know, when things are on Zoom. But the way that it's changed the actual dialogue around accessibility, I think is really undervalued. Because like if I was in high school and I could have seen one of these plays, like it would have changed my life. You know, it would have been a completely different experience from then on growing up. And I've been able to create things like this year. We created a Young Native Actors Award, and around at the Indigenous Performing Arts Program, and around that, you know, programming where they get to take different classes and things like that, and then be sort of like, you know, brought into the national Native theater community. And then what does that do for everyone else trying to produce plays when suddenly you don't have to cast 35-year-olds as teenagers anymore, because suddenly like, aha, we know where they all are, you know? So all that is to say, I think if anything, it's actually expedited the rate at which I can make relationships and meet people. And I was someone who was actually like, for at least a couple years before the pandemic started, because I was in the air constantly, like I was never in one place for more than a few minutes. I chose not to live in a city. And so that meant that like, I was like pretty much always away from home. Either I was like at 5 a.m. kind of like rolling onto the train to New York, or I was like, you know, like flying somewhere. And honestly, like the ability to just like sit here in my apartment and be in like 5,000 places at once means that I can in some ways get a lot more done. So I think it's a really unique opportunity for relationship building where you can take, I went on longer than I meant to, sorry, but I feel like people are really open to just talking across the entire world now in a way that wasn't true before, and actually presents a lot of possibilities if you're willing to look for them.
Yeah, and I think too, to your point, that native theater is in a lot of ways become less fringe, I think, for some presenters, because it's more, it feels more accessible to find because it's in video form. You can just jump in and join that Zoom reading that would have been, I think there's a little bit more of an appetite for watching work that way as well. And I'm actually wondering, Brooke, if you have any thoughts that you would want to add to this on how the pandemic has changed the way that you're experiencing work and building relationships, and where it's been a barrier and where it's been an opportunity.
Yeah, I think first I'll just say that not being able to sit in a space with artists and experience what it is that I'm being pitched on is a challenge. As a presenter, I am building a relationship of trust with the community that I'm working in and with the audiences. And as a predominantly contemporary, non-commercial based presenter, I'm asking them to come to something that they don't know what it is. It's not, Phantom Limb, it's amazing. I know it's amazing, but no one here in Salt Lake City is familiar with Phantom Limb because they're based on the East Coast and they haven't toured here before. So part of like having the courage to like put all this stuff out there that we've curated is having seen it ourselves, or having someone on our team or a really close collaborator having seen it, and someone who knows our community and knows its dynamics say, yeah, we could do that here. It might be hard because of this, or it's going to be amazing because of this, right? So that's a real challenge. So, I think what everybody out there can take from that is you maybe think you don't necessarily need really good ways for presenters to see your work in the virtual setting, even if it's just in development, but you do. Because if we can't be there to see it in person in some way, then we have to turn to YouTube clips or, recordings of the show. And if you're the more effort you put into having those at the ready and having them be what it is you want represented, not having it just be, what you were able to pull off, is important, because we're putting a lot of stock into that, what we're watching virtually. I would also say that keep in mind that, we're all struggling. I know artists are struggling. I know independent producers are struggling, but presenters are struggling too. And so when you're pitching right now, just remember in the back of your head that, so for example, Utah Presents, we've furloughed over 70 people in the past year. We are down to a bare bones staff. And those are really difficult financial decisions to make, but we're making them because I want to have money to give and pay artists for the work that we are doing. So that's the difference now. Like my resources are so limited, not just in terms of money, but also in terms of people and creative capacity. Like we're all in the same boat. We're all working on really altered resources right now. So those, I would say, are the two ways things have changed. I think another thing, and this connects to what Maddie was saying, is that we're engaging in a lot more field-wide conversations right now. Mm-hmm. We're trying to reimagine what will be when we can come back. And we're trying to deal with the reckoning that has needed to happen for so long. And so we're doing a lot more of these kinds of things. And so I'm listening in these things and I'm watching these things. I have never met Maddie before, but you better bet now's the time where I'm going to write down her name and be like, I'm going to go check out her work. So I'm making connections in different ways, just the way Maddie is, because our world has contracted in a geographic way, but it's expanded in a virtual way.
Exactly. No, right on. And I feel like there was so much that you that you just pulled in there as well about a lot of assumptions that I feel like a lot assumptions maybe isn't the right word, but this moment has made so many people so vulnerable that the entire way that the timeline, the approach, the kind of rhythm that anyone in the contemporary, performance booking kind of universe is used to has shifted, and every presenter is different, every artist is different, every independent producer is different in terms of what's going on. And I think that just adds, it seems to me from what you're saying, it adds an additional layer of really, really asking where your colleagues are at before diving in has been a big takeaway from this conversation. So another question I want to ask about is, this is taking a little bit of a turn, but I do think for folks who really want to get into the weeds of this, I think it's going to be valuable, which is, what do you wish that someone had told you about either pitching or more broadly about building successful collaborations when you were first building your career? And Brooke, too, if you answer this question, I'm curious too if you could speak a little bit more to, some of the kind of like tips for success and traps to avoid.
Sure. Well, I'll start with that, and then I'll end on the first question, so then you can transition to somebody else.
There you go.
So I would say things to avoid. Don't condescend to me about your artists. Like, I know artists are amazing, and I know they're doing amazing things, but don't tell me why I have to do that artist, because I'm in this place and I'm navigating the complexities of the place that I'm in. So listen to the signals or the things I'm saying that are indicating if it's not the right fit for me, and then respect that. Don't try to create, I think in our prep call, I said, don't try to, hook me with FOMO. Like, don't tell me that the Krannert Center is doing it and expect that to be why Utah Presents does it. We're very, very different. We have similarities, but we're very, very different. And if I say no, it's going to ask me to justify my no, to tell you why, so you can understand it. But don't forget that I told you no. Don't come back to me, a month later, 3 weeks later, 2 years later, and pitch me on the same thing. Because like Tommy said, we all have limited time, and you don't want to waste my time, and you don't want to waste your own time, right? So remember the no. And I would then also say, a really successful way to be ready for a pitch is to, particularly now, is to understand all of the capabilities of the artist you're representing, the project you're representing, or the things about yourself that maybe aren't apparent in that pitch description of the show. Because what I'm going to ask you is, okay, that's great. I love to know that about the show and what the experience is going to be for the audience that shows up on that night, on that date. But what about all the time I'm going to want to spend with you, connecting you or connecting these artists to our community as part of the engagement? And I think community engagement around a ticketed show is becoming more and more prevalent. It's as a presenter, it's why I exist, actually. I don't exist to sell the ticket to the show. I exist to create the connection between the artist and the community. So be ready to talk about that. And I often will ask an artist or a group or what else do you want to do? Like, other than the show, what else are you interested in? What else fascinates you from what you know on our community? What do you want to learn from us? So be ready to answer those questions, because that's actually what's going to, I think, make you stand out. I noticed Diego asked a question about what makes certain things stand out to presenters when we are always getting so much contacts is, there's that question. Ooh, fancy. Be ready with more than just your 3-minute pitch. Be ready to talk about, things that excite you beyond that particular project, or ways that you want to learn from the community you're going to, just be ready to talk about engagement. So those are a couple things. And then as far as what do I wish I had known? Well, I wish I've learned it, and I'm glad I've learned it, but I wish I had known to be more forward with saying, no, that's not the right fit for everything that isn't, right? So that I don't keep wasting the person who's pitching me's time, right? So I've learned that it's actually it's not mean. I mean, you can deliver it in a mean way, right? But to just be really forward and say, no, thank you, not at this time. And this really comes into play, I think, around conferences. And, I get requests from a lot of people for meetings, and some folks' approach is to just ignore the request. And what I've learned is a lot kinder way, and how I would want to be treated if I were having to reach out for cold meetings, is to say, thanks for reaching out, but I don't need a meeting at this time. And if I do, I'll come back and follow up with you. Yeah.
No, I love it. I think one of my favorite sayings that I've definitely adopted is that the next best answer to yes is no. As opposed to this like, oh, maybe, sort of, should we keep talking about it? No can be a real act of love. Yeah. And Tom, I'm going to kick it over to you. What do you wish someone had told you? Your younger Tommy self.
I think I think we all enter into a situation where we're constantly feeling like we're going to step over some boundary, or we're going to cross a line, or people aren't going to be as welcome to ideas. I think there's a lot more fear that is instilled in us about that than that I think is warranted. I think if somebody had told me, be way more brave than you're being from the very beginning, I think it just would have been nice to take less time to come around to the fact that what I need to be doing is taking way more risk. What I need to be doing is bringing way more what I feel to be a more transformational capacity to the work that I'm bringing to people. I think the mistake is always underestimating who's across the table from you. And there are lots of ways to do that. I have my own issues with, talking to someone with whom I'm sort of possibly, you're talking to a university where you're prejudging what the cultural capacity of that university might be. It's a big football school. They're not even going to come to shows on Saturdays. All the parameters that come with any, situation that, occurs is always kind of a prejudgment as to what work is going to be appropriate for them. What are they really going to agree to? What are they going to do? And I know, believe me, what it feels like to be sitting across from a blank stare when you're talking to somebody about something that is extremely important. And it has extreme relation and value to their community. And they're really not understanding where that is and how that works. And it's a terrible feeling. It's the worst feeling. Brooke, it's sort of the opposite of like, don't underestimate or don't condescend me. But there's a part of it on the other side, right, where you're being really condescended to by somebody who's like, yeah, no, we don't have gay people in my town. It's like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, or just some feeling where all of a sudden it's like this person is deeply unaware around even the own dynamics in their city, and doesn't care to talk about that. So, the question about, and that is something I deal with all the time, and it's very, very, it's tricky and deflating to say the least. So I think what you have to really, I think, understand from the beginning is that the person across from you welcomes transformation, welcomes change, welcomes high creativity, welcomes risk, welcomes an extraordinary adventure and journey that they want to go on with a piece, and trust that if you believe in your heart that you are bringing that, bring it, really bring it. And figure out what the dynamics of that are, and be as brave as you can in your delivery of that. And it will come back to you. It will come back to you. If it doesn't work for that person right there, the energy you're bringing to it is going to get to another person, either through them or through another way, and it will happen. And so I think the trust in that inevitability is something very, very difficult to know from the beginning. But like, after doing this for 25 years, the feeling of like, it's going to be okay, we're going to get there, is a really good feeling to have.
That's great. No, thank you so much, Tommy. I think the be brave is really, again, to bring that passion and to really know that, you know, clearly if you're working with an artist and you believe in them, to really make all of that uh, present, right on. I mean, I think that's a great piece of advice for folks. Um, I want to invite folks who are in the comment section, if you have additional questions, to go ahead and share them, because I think in a couple minutes we're going to move to a question, to pulling questions from the chat. Before we do that, there was one more question from me that I wanted to throw out to all of you, which was if you could each speak a little bit more about how trust, listening, and transparency are a part of your process. I know those are words that have, you know, a number of them have kind of already kind of made their way woven through the conversation, and I wonder if we can kind of bring this section of the conversation home, touching on those just a little bit, and maybe some short responses this time, if you don't mind, so we could take some questions from the chat. And Maddie, I'm going to start with you.
Sure. Well, just I think also tying that to the question before, also, I was just thinking a lot about, you know, like early in my career, well, not even early in my career, I guess like sort of pre-career, right? When they're like training you to be in the field, they're always trying to get you to like compare yourself to existing things as if that's the thing that is most useful. And it's really not. I feel like you need to know who you are and you need to know what you care about. And if you are consistent in knowing that, it's infinitely more valuable than trying to like pretend you exist in some sort of box. I mean, yes, in order to pitch, there needs to be words that exist that can describe you. However, that does not mean that you cannot invent those words, right? It doesn't mean that you can't create the situation in which like that thing then exists. And I say that because like for me, so much of what I've done has actually been because I've been trying to like get out of containers people have been putting me in, and ultimately the things that I'm usually doing aren't necessarily received well at the first moment. Like I remember the first few times I went to the Shakespeare Theater Association, you know, like when I was directing all native Shakespeare's, like everyone was like, oh, so cute, you know, like it's like your community service project. Like that's kind of how it was treated. And then like now it's like everybody would like wants that, you know, it's like, oh, that's the thing that we need because everyone's like investigating now how Shakespeare's colonial. And so they actually have to examine these things. And so things change, but you ultimately need to know who you are in relationship to the world around you. My solo show existed not because I wanted to write a play, but because I had something I needed to figure out. And then every time someone said, can you do this again? I've said, please no, you know, because it really isn't that fun to do. But it stimulates interesting questions that I want to be asked in the world. And so then I'm like, it's worth it to ask those questions. And so in relationship to that, also trying to keep it short, but really failing, Ronnie, sorry. The trust is so important because I recognize, because I'm shifting positions so often, that the amount of vulnerability that goes into any of these positions is perceived differently if you're a director, if you're a writer, if you're a performer, if you're a producer, but it exists in all of those spaces. And so you really need to be able to trust people, to know that you're willing to go on that ride with them. And I feel like I appreciate nothing more than when people than having return collaborators. I feel like return collaborators are like a gift in so many ways. One, because it means like, I almost swear it means you didn't mess up that badly the first time, right? But then two, because like there's like a comfortability there, right? When you go back into that relationship and you can deepen the work, or you go back, or the producer asks you back and they say, hey, what are you working on? You're like, oh my God, what am I working on? That's like the most generous thing you could say to me. I can do whatever I want. Right. And, or a playwright like trust you enough to keep bringing their plays back to you. It just means so much. And so anyway, so all of that is to say that I think it comes from appreciating and understanding that vulnerability. And it's really hard when you are operating between cultures. And I recognize that as a Native person, because so much of it has to do with the instances in which I did not receive respect. Very early on, I became a director, mostly because I had seen like a lot of non-Native directors do really horrible things. And I was like, the bar is low. I was like, the bar is really low right now. So all I have to do is respect everyone, and actually that will be a great starting place. And so like being comfortable to ask the questions and be vulnerable and respect each other, and like really respect each other before you take out your own securities, right? And like try and make it seem like you know what's going on and everything is okay. Like that kind of transparency, the transparency to actually be with each other and communicate and be vulnerable, like to me, like that is what has 100% built my career. Like there is no one I have ever worked with who is like, she always has it together. Like no one is going to say that. I don't think so. But they know that I'm always honest, right? And that actually means a lot more, because that means the relationships are deep. And that ultimately they can trust me, and they know that I'm doing the work and that I'm thinking about things really deeply, and that the producers I really trust, the ones where I feel like I can come to them and say like, this thing happened and we need to address it, not the ones who I'm scared of because I think that they're going to come in and say something racist in my rehearsal, right? And so really honoring I think everyone's humanity is a big part of that for me.
No, thank you for sharing the full thought of that, because I think that's incredibly valuable, connects to the last question, and it's foundational. It is the thing, and it underscores it's our own storytelling of where we are and how we work the way we work. I mean, your background is informing so much of the way that you operate in the world, and so I love the connections you're making there.
Also why we tell stories, right? Which is different for different people.
Right. And I just have to say too that, Tommy, when you said about that we don't have, gay folks here, if I had a nickel for every time I heard that about Native people, I'd be a very rich lady. So, it's, yeah, but anyway, but I digress. I want to get back to, I want to make sure that I hear Brooke and Tommy on this question of trust, listening, and transparency. And the other question I'm seeing in the chat, I'm going to shout out to you, Meredith, that I'm wondering if you still want to get an answer to that question. I think we might have answered it, but please give a ping if you'd like us to speak specifically to it. Otherwise, I'm going to keep going. But folks in the comments thread, please shout out if there's a specific question you want us to get to. Okay. Yeah, Tommy, let's throw it over to you for trust, listening, and transparency.
I think every producer on this in this forum knows what it's like to get back into a situation or have to have a very difficult conversation about where a project has turned. And I think from the very beginning, they're, part of that pitch process and where things really get established between you and a collaborator partner is really, establishing as much as possible that not just that they can kind of trust what you're saying right now. I mean, very often I will catch myself saying things all the time in a pitch that they're salesy. They're really salesy. I'm here to get the job done, and I'm here to get the gig, and that's cool. I mean, I'm okay with that. But that has come back to bite me in the ass for sure. I mean, the situation changed. The artist had a different vision. Something got much more expensive. Things happened within that. What I need Brooke to be able to trust for me is that we're gonna work through that, and we're gonna really figure that out. And I think that's implicit to the process, that there's got to be that trust and engagement and a certain level of transparency about what could go awry or what could just change and what pivots can happen within that process. That I have to listen very carefully to them, and they have to listen very carefully to me to kind of understand what all those parameters are and what could possibly shift. And I have to get better about describing those things off the bat so that everybody understands exactly what journey they're going on. So there really aren't surprises when those things happen. As difficult as they can be, there really shouldn't be surprises. And that's really particular to the fact that I'm very often starting from the seat of a work. It's 3 years until I have a final thing with a final technical writer that is utterly mobile and just ready to roll and can load in a day and boom, 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 boom. Until we get to that point, the artist needs to have all the freedom to do what they want, period. And I have to be the shield and conduit to allow that. And they're looking at me for parameters. I'm looking at them for parameters. The partner is looking at all of us for parameters, and we're all doing the dance and trying to figure that out so we can all rise together. So I think that to me is where like the trust and transparency thing is really very key.
Right on. Thanks, Tommy. And Brooke, would you like to take us home?
Yeah, I'm going to focus real heavily on the transparency, because I think trust doesn't necessarily come without it. And Ronnie, I'm going to share a story from our relationship, and hopefully it's okay, because I didn't think about doing this. I should have put it in a private message you asked.
No, go for it. I'm going to book.
Better her than me. I like that.
I think the thing that we are the least transparent about in these relationships is money, right? Because I mean, in its most simplest form, Tommy's trying to get the most money for Maddie and her collaborators, and I'm trying to pay the least amount of money because I'm trying to lose the least amount of money. I mean, and I don't say that negatively. We do revenue negative work. That's why we raise money. That's why we ask patrons to trust us and donate money. That's why we exist at universities where there's other structures that support what we do. So I'm gonna lose money on almost everything I do, but how much I lose does matter. So money's the thing we tend to talk about the least. And so the story I'll share is that, Ronnie and I were new to working with each other. And we met through a couple of different things, a couple of different sort of networking connections. And there was a piece that Ronnie was representing that was really compelling for Utah Presents. And we had a great first time coffee meeting sitting down at some coffee shop in New York at the end of an APAP. And we talked about the project. We talked about all the amazing community engagement we could build. We talked about why it mattered to Utah Presents, why it mattered in Salt Lake City. We talked about what the company was trying to accomplish. We did all the right things. And then when we talked about money, we didn't go real deep. We did that thing where you kind of just do a surface thing. I said, well, what's the quote? And Ronnie said, it's this much. And I wrote that down because I take really good notes. I took that number because that's the number that Ronnie gave me. And I went back and I moved around my budget and I figured out how to make it happen because she pitched me on the project really well, right? And then when I went back to Ronnie and said, let's do it. And I said, this is the number you gave me. And Ronnie said, yeah, it's that number. And then this, and then this, and then this. The things that she was adding on weren't unreasonable, but that's not what our conversation about money was in that coffee meeting. And it was because we went through it quickly because it's the most uncomfortable part of our relationship, right? And so then we had to have a moment which could have went really badly. I mean, I could have just walked away. Ronnie could have just said, well, Brooke's trying to nickel and dime us. I don't want to work with her, But we had to have a moment where we were honest and transparent. And that's what happened. I said, this is the number you gave me. So that's the number I made happen. And I don't have more to work with. And Ronnie came back and said, this is the number I gave you for this part, but this is why we really need these other things, and gave me the context. And then we met in the middle because at that point we were being transparent enough with each other to begin the relationship of trust, right? And so now if I'm going to talk to Ronnie about a project, I'm going to trust that when we talk about the money, we're both going to know to make sure to be really clear about what that number really is.
Yes, and what that number includes and doesn't include, because in that coffee meeting where you're running out the door and the adding the words plus blah 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 for this extra thing becomes really important. So, but that, I mean, I feel like as a result of that, working through that really honestly and frankly, and I think it actually ended up making our relationship stronger in the long run, having gone through that.
And we solved the problem together, which means that we built that pathway, right? It's like building a pathway in your brain. We built that pathway in our relationship. So now we know that even if we have another conflict's not a bad thing, that we have a pathway already built to solve it together.
No, I'm really glad you brought up that story. I would love to keep staying on and talking with these lovely folks, but I'm seeing now that we're a little over time. So what I want to transition to is first gratitude. Thank you so much to the three of you for joining and sharing time in the middle of this pandemic. We're still in a year later, and talking about this topic. I'm thrilled to get all of you in the same space together and introduce some of you for the first time. So just first, thank you. So appreciate it. And from the awesome chat that's happening, I know everyone here is really appreciating it as well. And then next, what I want to say to everyone listening is thank you so much for joining as well. Please let folks know that this will be available after the fact tonight. The recording is available online, and you can find that through producerhub.org. And our next webinar is going to be on anti-racism and accountability, and that's going to be 2 weeks from today on March 18th. And again, you can register for that and get more information about that and all of our future webinars at producerhub.org/webinars. So thank you all so much for joining us, and please do hit us up with questions and suggestions for future webinars. This was actually a recommendation from one of the members of the Creative and Independent Producer Alliance, who's actually here tonight. So, you know, your idea about what you need in your practice could be the next webinar. So again, thank you so much for joining us. Really so grateful to be in community with y'all, and have a fantastic night. Thank you.